Hey everybody, Brittany here, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be covering Game 2 of Fischer's 60 Memorable Games. This time, Fischer is playing white again against Bent Larsen this time, and Fischer with the white pieces starts with the move e4. After e4, we see c5, knight f3, and now d6. So game 1, we remember that we saw e6, so this is not going down that line. And because of that, Fischer is happy to go into the open Sicilian here with d4. After pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, and knight c3, there's a few variations that can be played. The Najdorf, very popular, classical Sicilian, Scheveningen, and also the dragon. Bent Larsen ends up going for the dragon here, and Fischer, I believe, mentioned that this game and a few other of his are kind of the reason why the dragon isn't held to as high of an esteem nowadays. So after g6 here, we see the move bishop to e3. And one thing to point out here is that knight g4 is not playable because of bishop b5 check. If the bishop were on g7, king f8 is totally playable. But right now, something has to interpose, and whatever it does is not something that black wants to do. For example, knight bd7, you lose the knight on g4. Bishop d7, same thing. You lose the knight on g4 here. So that's a little trick for you there. So, of course, Bent Larsen's a master. He's not going to fall for this. Plays bishop g7. Now knight g4 is actually a threat. So, for example, if you play a move like queen d2, knight g4, this bishop b5 check doesn't work out as well anyways, because it doesn't even matter that the queen's not even attacking the knight. There's also king f8 if needed, if the queen was still on d1. But here, that's not even the case. All right. So now f3 is played because, again, knight g4 was a threat. Because winning this bishop is very important, because then this bishop becomes unopposed. And as a dragon player, one may know this is your strongest piece by a long shot, just because of all of the reach it has for defensive capabilities and also for offensive capabilities. Now we see castles, queen to d2 here. And in the future, you can always expect some sort of bishop h6 with the idea of removing their defender when you're going for a kingside attack. We see knight to c6. Now bishop to c4. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and bishop to e6. So when I first went over this game myself, my instinct was to take. Which is actually not really the best idea, because although we get to cripple their kingside here, it actually serves as a useful move for black, because now they have more central control, as we can see. And the open f-file doesn't really hurt them that much, because now their rook is activated and doesn't have to move to e8. So that's just another point there. Plus there's always either rook f7 or queen e8 to f7 in case you really need it for defensive capabilities there. So Fischer plays bishop to b3. The argument here is that if bishop takes and pawn takes, well, now this actually is something that white is happy about. Now white is controlling more space. We can easily see in a long shot, let's just say a move like knight e2 and c3 happening, where any rooks coming to the c file will just be completely neutralized. Let's just throw in some random moves here. Not saying these are best, but now, as we can see, this rook is completely useless on this file. Maybe not completely, but its attacking capabilities are much reduced. So let's go back all the way, and instead, of course, Bent Larsen did not take on b3. They played queen to a5. And here I was a little concerned to castle, because at first it looks like some sort of bishop takes b3, pawn takes b3, there could be issues. But the truth is, you don't actually have to worry. You can castle anyways, as if takes, we can actually take either with the a or c pawn. A pawn The one thing to be concerned about is something like this here, where maybe the knight's not as active, but the truth is the queen on b1 might not be as happy. But there's actually even better, which is just c takes, which is really surprising, because now you're just going to play king b1, and maybe the c file is actually useful for white here, with some sort of rook to c1 coming, and it's actually really unclear who the move favors after bishop takes b3. A bit of a counterintuitive one there. So anyways, Larsen went for b5 instead. And the idea of b5 is pretty simple. There's ideas of b4, queen b5, a5, a4. Very aggressive plan, but trying to convince this bishop to take on e6 with some tempo. And of course, one big idea in the Sicilian is to march your pawns forward against your opponent's king to open lines against their king. So Fischer plays king b1. This is a nice prophylactic move. This is a very common idea here. Now, white has a threat of a potential knight d5. Let's say a6, not really a useful move at all. Knight d5, and the whole point is, after taking on d2, there's this intermezzo, knight takes e7 with check. The king has to move, and now we can take on d2. And, well, we're extremely happy here as white. We just took a very important pawn, and the knight has a safe way back with knight to d5. So there is actually a threat with king to b1, but it's also just a nice prophylactic move because, as we can see here, the c file is open, semi-open, I guess you could say, and a rook could come to c8, and do we really want our king opposed to a rook? So there's just a lot of purpose behind a move like king b1. It's very useful in these types of opposite side castling Sicilians here. So instead, b4 was played. Because, well, again, I'll say it over and over, Bent Larsen's a master. He's not going to play cooperative moves like a6. Knight to d5 was played, and bishop takes d5 was played, which to me was very interesting. But the idea here is that if knight takes d5 is played and bishop takes on g7, we could argue that this is a more beneficial trade for white, because we're removing a defender, and after king takes, and either bishop takes or pawn takes. I think bishop takes would be preferred here. Some sort of h4, h5 could be a lot more deadly because there's not really many defenders around the black king there. So going back here, bishop takes d5. And after bishop takes d5, Larsen does not take on d5, which arguably is more of a testing try. Still going for this variation, because what happens in the game after rook a to c8, deciding to move the rook, is Fischer's happy to keep his bishop, and this is both a defensive and offensive piece, quite like the bishop on g7. It's one of white's most valuable pieces. Arguably this piece is equally as valuable though, as it's the opposite to the g7 bishop. But this bishop on b3 is quite powerful, so taking on d5 was a more serious option there. So now Larsen goes for rook to c7, and we see h4. So one thing I was thinking when I was going over the game was I was thinking of a move like g4, but the truth is, what does g4 do? And sometimes it's hard to know whether you should play g4 or h4, but here g4 is kind of just a waste of time. And the reason why is because after queen b5, a5, a4 is coming. And this doesn't really help open up the h-file against black's king here, which is the best plan. So instead, h4 is played, which is by far the better move. We see queen b5, as mentioned, so a5, a4 is coming, trying to kick this bishop, and also potentially open up lines against the king. And now we see a nice move here from Fischer. We see the move h5, which does sacrifice a pawn, but there's a lot of critical reasons why moves like this are played anyways. After knight takes h5, bishop takes on g7 here. Knight takes g7, for example, could be met with queen h6. And it's actually really hard to defend now, because if you play a move like knight to h5, we always have moves like g4 coming. And this is actually really hard to meet because after knight to f6, we can keep preparing things with either rook to d5 or some sort of g5 in the future here. Anyways, yeah, so this is one of the biggest reasons why h5 is actually a very common move in the dragon. Opening up the h file is much more important than just having a pawn on the h file for white, because it kind of blocks all your pieces from accessing this very important, especially this very important h6 square, or of course these two as well, which will offer mate. So rook f to c8 was played. Fischer's going for his plans, and Larsen goes for theirs. And again, this g4 is not really that useful, which is something that I was thinking still. It's just something I wanted to play. I'm not really sure why. I think the idea for me was if they were to take now, which is a very stupid move. Now you have moves like g5, followed by rook h5, and then the other rook to h1, which is completely winning, but of course that's not really the most useful way to spend your time here. Instead, h takes g6 opens up the h file as intended with this h5 move. H takes on g6, not f takes g6. I'm more used to seeing f takes g6 in my games, but of course this bishop on b3, now we see its strength. You can't even take with the f pawn. But after h takes g6, Fischer made a move that looked good, but there's actually a better one. Fischer played g4, which is, again, something I wanted to play for a while. But there's a lot stronger here. A lot stronger. And this move is pretty brilliant, but it's hard to see. So white to move and win. And it's not really just like an immediate tactic, but when you see the move, you kind of see the concept behind it. So the move is rook h6. Very, very surprising. But this actually wins the game. And why? So there's two things that black can do. They can either take the rook or ignore it. Let's see an example where they take. Bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, queen h5 to block the h file. But after queen h5, we play queen c1. Rook h1's coming, queen h6 is going to happen afterwards. Black's just getting checkmated, even though white's down in exchange here. This is just completely lost because the absence of the dark square bishop here is just deadly. And if we go back and they don't take, okay, well then why do we play rook h6? Is it to play rook h1? No. The problem is it's actually really hard to defend this pawn properly. If king f8, then we can consider something like the rook to h1. But here I gave the line a5 just to see if they do nothing at all. And rook takes g6 just wins very clearly. a4, we just ignore it and go queen h6 with checkmate here. So those are just two examples of the power of this rook to h6 move. But that's extremely difficult to find because it kind of just looks like a trick move. Just like, oh, if you take, then okay, I take back, and then well, queen h5. It looks unclear at first, but then when you start calculating, you realize, yeah, it totally works. All right, so g4 was played, and now we see a5. So I was thinking of the move bishop takes f6 here when I was looking through this, but this is just a not good move. The idea that I had was that we're on the offense here, so something like queen h6 so looks really good. But the truth is, after e6, it's actually very unclear, and you could argue that maybe black is actually better now because a4 is coming. This bishop is really uncomfortable, and there's no mate. Queen h7, just king f8, and there's no queen h8 because, yeah, this e6 really just kind of saves the day to avoid any queen takes on g6, and black's threats are really, really annoying to deal with now. So this isn't the right call. G5 instead is much, much better, where after g5 here, we see the move knight h5, and these moves are always hard for me to tell if it's correct or like knowing when to play them in the direct moments here. But there's a really nice move that Fischer plays, which is pretty thematic with these types of dragon Sicilians. and it's the move rook takes h5. So rook takes h5 is very thematic because the idea is the knight is a defender of the king, and so is the bishop. So if they play knight h5, we're just removing one of the defenders because we still have more attackers. We can still play rook to h1 in the future, or rook to g1, depending on which file's open. So after rook takes h5, g takes h5 was played. And now we see a very, very accurate move here. Not trading the bishops, because if we trade the bishops, the problem here is that there's not the move that we have that's a little bit more accurate. Now that's kind of a lame way to describe it, but the move g6 is just a cruncher. Because after g6, it's taking advantage of this long diagonal and trying to open up lines against the king. And as we can see, this king is very airy. There's not really many defenders, only this bishop, but it's about to be traded off soon. And then when we look at it, we have a bishop attacking, our queen's going to come in fast, and our rook is going to come in just as fast as well. So Larsen played e5 here, trying to at least keep one defender near their king. But of course, this gives up the f7 pawn with check, king to f8, and bishop to e3. So I had the idea of queen to g5 here, which I believe actually is perfectly fine. The idea here is we're going to play a move like rook to g1, and they can't even take the bishop. So it's just trying to be more accurate with move orders. Yeah, so queen to g5 is totally fine. Instead here, bishop to e3 was played. Now we see d5. E takes d5. Fischer takes the pawn with the pawn. And why doesn't he take it with the bishop? The problem is, if you take on d5, maybe there's some rook takes c2 complications in this position here. A variation like this could happen, and this is very unclear now, and this is not what Fischer was hoping for in a variation like this. So leaving the bishop on b3 is pretty important to prevent rook takes c2, and therefore pawn takes d5. And there is an added benefit that king takes f7 is not possible because d6 is check and wins the rook or the exchange somehow. You might have to play some sort of like rook c4 even to avoid that. But then you also have to worry about moves like d7 as well. So this is just very, very, very bad because white will at the very least win back in exchange, and probably more than that after a move like queen d3 here. So here Bent Larsen went for rook takes f7. But after rook takes f7, it does weaken the light squares a little bit. Like that pawn was useful on f7, but we're also kind of just as happy to let it go because it does open up these two squares against the king for our bishop to look at, and possibly for our queen to use in the future as well. So after rook takes f7, Fischer goes for d6, which just aims to open up the bishop because this bishop is a very important piece. The pawn on d6 is pretty valuable now, but it's honestly not as valuable as this bishop. Turns out this pawn does actually create a ton of problems for black anyways. Rook to f6 was played. Bishop to g5 here, which is a very nice move because it's actually hard to make a good move now with black. For example, you're just losing in the exchange. If you play a move like rook to g6, there's at the very least a move like bishop to g7. You have to play king e8 and then d7 check. Wins their queen and their rook, or if you take on e7, then we get another queen here. This is clearly winning. So here queen b7 was played to start covering some of the light squares now. Bishop takes on f6. Bishop takes f6. And a really nice move here, d7. D7 is aimed towards obviously attacking the rook, but then also this queen h6 check in the future, or queen d6. It opens up both of these squares now. and offers mating possibilities. And it's important that we play this because if you play some sort of queen h6, maybe they can interpose with some sort of queen g7 to start covering some squares. But d7 blocks the queen's access to the side of the board for defense. After Bent Larsen played rook d8, Fischer played queen d6 and also mentioned, oh no, I missed something. I missed queen h6, which is actually a faster way to checkmate here. Where after queen h6 check, bishop to g7, we now have queen to d6 with checkmate. And of course, if king e7, now we can play the move queen h7, the bishop has to block, and now we can take with mate. So that would be a mate in 3 instead of Fischer's move queen d6 check, which also does completely win, mind you, because after a move like bishop to e7 or king g7, the position is just a total mess for black. Rook g1 check is coming, and of course if they block, then there's queen h6 with checkmate. So if we go into this variation though, the king has to go to the h file, they lose the bishop, and they're still getting mated. That's clearly resignable. And of course, after queen d6 check, Bent Larsen decides to resign the game. So this was a really interesting one for me, especially because as a less seasoned player than Fischer, I think it's fair to say, this g4 was something that I wanted to play. And I couldn't really say why. It's not really that clear of a move after thinking about it. I think the biggest thing is a lot of people would be afraid of h4, h5s. But these things aren't really something you have to worry about too much, as there's always g4 anyways going for the sacrifice of the pawn. So yeah, this point was really important for me personally, realizing that h4 is just going to be more useful there. And then also there was that crazy knockout with rook to h6, which is very difficult to find. And lastly, one of the nice points was this rook takes h5 especially. Sacrificing the exchange, but just for so much activity after the move g6 that we can see that there's more than enough compensation for the exchange, and white should just be winning here. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the game, and I will see you in game number 3. Have a good one. Bye-bye.